I think it's important to note right off the bat that within the last 72 hours, the temperature in Ukraine, south and north, east and west, has now fallen permanently below freezing. That means that if we get 2 weeks of continuous freezing, there is no reason why, at least for meteorological reasons, the Russians should not launch their coming offenses. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, Bakhmut has figured prominently in everybody's calculus because it's drawn so much attention. Bakhmut has turned into something that is analogous in some ways to Hitler's obsession with Stalingrad for Stalinsky. Stalinsky and his friends seem to think that the loss of Bakhmut is unacceptable, would break the will of the Ukrainian people, demoralize Ukrainian forces. And so he has continued to sacrifice thousands of Ukrainian lives in that place. We now estimate 450,000 casualties thus far in the war, close to 150,000 dead.
And yeah, this is both sides, 450 and 150.
No, this is the Ukrainian side. And if you listen to General Zaluzny, he came on earlier today, or could have been last night, talked about how supposedly the Russians are advancing over the bodies of their dead comrade because the Ukrainians have killed so many. The only thing I can think of is he's channeling Baghdad, Bob. If you remember when we intervened in Iraq in 2003, this Baghdad, Bob, kept coming on, telling everybody about the victorious forces of the Khrushchev, throwing his back, inflicting cash.
I remember Baghdad, Bob. I tried to interview him, but he turned down everybody from Fox, understandably. But I'm interested in your comparison of General Zaluzny to Baghdad, Bob, of all people. I thought General Zaluzny was the adult and was credible not only to the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian public, but to the Russian high command.
Well, I'm not sure about the last part of you're credible to the Russians. I just don't know what they think. I doubt seriously that they hold anybody in the current regime in high esteem. Having said that, remember that Zaluzny was actually very honest to the extent that he could be in his Economist interview and essentially pointed out, I need a new army. I need all of this equipment. If I don't get it, I'm probably not going to be able to withstand what's coming from the Russians. But now he's back in the saddle, and he's been told to get back online and back on board. And the mantra is, we're killing Russians by the hundreds every day. We're winning. We're doing well. But you know, as well as I do, they're now pressing teenagers into service. We have photos of them and video coming out over various internet sites, which is tragic to say the least.
16, little boy. It's not only tragic. And as you pointed out to me in some private email, and you and I did, where are the NGOs? Where are the non-government organizations that are humanitarian to prevent this? Probably, I don't know how old these kids were. The kids that I saw, their faces looked 14, 15, 16. It was hard to tell because they had military gear on, but they were. They didn't shave yet. Let's put it that way. Absolutely. It's got to be a violation of international law and clearly European human rights, which is pretty sensitive on the use of children in the military. But beyond that, is it not telling of how desperate Zelensky is? If he's conscripting 15 and 16-year-olds?
Of course. But to this, you've also got to add the fact that they are desperately seeking foreign fighters now. The foreign fighters are becoming very, very important to them because they just don't have experienced NCOs and officers anymore. They're bringing in raw talent with very little training. And of course, you have this man, Milburn, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, who came out and gave an interview and talked about how desperate the Ukrainians were. And he talked about the heavy losses and, frankly, why he was pulling out his mercenary training group. So I think at this point in time, it's really up to the Russians. The initiative is passed to ask them that the weather is in their favor now, and there is nothing to stop them from attacking whenever they want to by the middle of January.
What is the status of the 300,000 or so, more or less, reservists called up to duty back in the fall? Trained, armed, transported, ready to go. I'm assuming trained, armed, and transported and ready to go. I'll leave that to you to correct me.
No, I think so. Understand that I do disagree a little bit with some other analysts. As Scott Ritter has argued, It's going to take longer to get them ready. I think they're integrated now. As I said, they're getting the 2 weeks of freezing temperatures. There is no reason why they cannot attack. Everything that's been happening down in the Donbass, everything that happens with these missile strikes that go in day after day, is all about shaping the battle space.
Making it
Safe, if you will, for the maximum offensive power of the Russian army.
all right. In the interest of fairness, and because this is television, and because I like, or it's streaming, because I like it's streaming, because I like to stir the pot. We, from time to time, have others on than you and Scott Ritter, even though you and Scott are our favorites. What?
What? We have other people on? I'm shocked, Judge. Are our favorites. This is a person, a longtime friend of mine, longtime a guy that our audience loves to hate. And I asked him, Jack Devine, about the 300,000 Russians. It's a long answer, but he gets around answering it at the end. Gary, doesn't he have about 300,000 called up, uniformed, now trained, reservists about to enter the theater of war? And if he does, wouldn't that overwhelm the Ukrainian forces?
He had 180,000 in the last round. I mean, that's not chicken feet, right? And you looked at it, they weren't armed properly. Where did they get the new arms? Where did they get the training? How did they get so battle ready in 6 months? You're looking at Ukrainians who've been fighting for almost a year now. They're as tough as nail. Their strategy, their planning. You're going to send a lot of rookies in. So they have gas, they have logistics, 300,000. They're going to just march in. They're going to abuse air power. I mean, do they want to fight? We know what wars are like when they went into Afghanistan. My goodness. I mean, full-blown Russian army went in and was driven off by sheep herders. And why? Because I'll tell you firsthand, the Russian soldiers did not want to fight in Afghanistan. Are they really going to fight in Ukraine? I mean, it's almost like a civil war. And it's unprovoked. We'll see how. Look at the Iraqi army. How many troops are in the Iraqi army, Judge? 300,000, armed by the United States. Where did they go? They went home. So size is in the story.
All right, Colonel. I saw your muckling on the monitor. What do you think?
Well, I don't know.
Jack is always going to mouth the party line. I don't know. Maybe this would be against the law. Maybe they clipped the pensions of CIA officers who've retired and failed to mouth the company line. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't see this man as someone who knows as much about Russians or Ukrainians. His comments about Afghanistan are really very misleading. The Russian, if we go back and look at the Soviet forces that went into Afghanistan at the beginning, they were overwhelmingly Russians. They went in there and they very rapidly established themselves. Then the subsequent follow-on forces were overwhelmingly reserved as it came out of Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. In other words, nearby places. Frankly, these people weren't terribly interested in fighting what was there. But having said all of that, our so-called Iraqi army vanished almost overnight, whereas the Soviet-trained forces held forth for a couple of years after they left. And so did the Soviet.
Does he have a point when he says the 300,000 don't have the will to fight? Or are these 300,000? I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about National Guard guys who have jobs during the week and they train 1 week in the month and 2 weeks of summer like here? Or are we talking about hardened professionals?
Well, first of all, unlike most of your National Guardsmen in the United States, all of these 300,000 have served inside the Russian army.
They have been on active duty.
And anywhere from 3 to 8 years. And so what they've been going through is essentially updating their training, updating them on the various modernization programs, the equipment that's available. And they've been training for winter fighting. And they've been training very, very hard. The other thing is, I don't think this man really understands anything about Russians or Ukrainians. First of all, We all know Ukrainians are tough. I grew up with them, and I know their war records.